All right, we are now live. I'll be sharing onto social.
So who's the boss here, Michelle or me? Should I start this?
Either works. I was planning to toss you guys questions if that would
Good,
help it flow better.
great.
All right, should we get started?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay. Well, thanks to everyone who's joining us this morning after election night for the Nevada Independence tradition of doing a debrief on the results the day after. We've got with us a lot of our team members who are covering various different races. We've got Gabby and Eric, who were covering some of the federal races, Tabitha, whose focus was on legislative races, Rocio focused on education, Howard on the mayor's race, and of course, John making all of our predictions and otherwise being a major part of us calling the races that we have. This morning, we ended up calling that Trump race for Nevada, which goes in direct opposition to your prediction, John. So tell us, why was the crystal ball so wrong this time?
I'm not sure what you're referring to. Did you post the wrong prediction column, Michelle? Didn't I predict
I
Trump
messed up.
would win Nevada? Did I forget that? The truth is, and I've been thinking about writing I'm started writing a I was wrong column about this, trying to figure out how inexplicably I could have been wrong after all these years. And listen, I think really, here's what I thought. I went by history, 20 years of four straight cycles at least of the Democratic machine being able to do whatever it needs to do to win, and even being able to make up for this Republican deficit. And the thing is, I think that they did turn out who they thought were their voters. But what happened across the country is that these voters turned out not to be their voters. And so there was a dramatic underperformance by Kamala Harris among younger voters, among Latinos especially. I may be wrong, Gabby, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the exit polls showed that she only won Latinos by 4 points nationally or something insane like that. And so I just think that I thought that the Democratic machine would be able to do what it usually does, and it couldn't. It couldn't come close to pushing her over the top, and it may or may not save Jackie Rosen. We don't know the final answer there, but it'll probably end up barely saving Susie Lee from a huge upset. But Democrats are going to suffer some down ballot losses because of this as well, and it certainly costs them having a supermajority in the legislature, and they're probably not going to have supermajorities in either house from what the results look like now.
That's an interesting question about the Reed machine. And our team had a piece last week about that ground game, the canvassing, the door knocking. Um, what's different now? How was that not able to put us over the edge as it has in the past?
Well, maybe someone who went along on that can talk about the reactions at the doors but I really do believe that people are less likely to tell you how they really feel than ever before. And I think it's reasonable to assume, and there's no polling data on this yet, but I think that no taxes on tips stripped away some core support from Harris. It can't account for what may end up being a 3 or 4 or 5% loss, but it may have had an effect in just what we used to in the old days before any of you were born, except Howard, call Reagan Democrats. I think there were some of those out there that are now Trump Democrats and just were done with what they see as a far left agenda, and they related to what Trump was saying more. It may be as simple as that in some ways.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that we saw across the country that the Harris ground game was better in seemingly every swing state, and it seemed not to matter. And so I think, John, right, you were talking about the prediction was based on like the strength of that historically, like how well the Democratic machine performs. And I think it's sort of evidence that as politics becomes more nationalized, I think like hearing from your neighbors, getting these reach outs from local people might matter less than listening to, the right podcast that you already trust or wherever you already have a relationship with whatever media source. Someone who does races here told me that, smart Republican campaigns will target what they call Joe Rogan Democrats. So it's just like people who might have voted Democrat in the past, but listen to Joe Rogan. They didn't like, mask mandates, for example. They're concerned about DEI, those types of people, working class voters often. And so I think it's that type of voter that we're seeing in the exit polls that broke for Trump. And yeah, I just think the ground game, I think even the best ground games, people often say move a race like 2 points. And so I think obviously it was a bigger swing than that regardless, but I think the ground game just seemingly didn't matter as much.
Howard went out to Allegiant Stadium, one of the most popular polling sites in Clark County, and met one of those folks that was influenced by. Tell us a little bit about your voter, Howard.
Well, it was interesting. This guy, we talked to him as he was walking out from the stadium after he voted inside the stadium, and then got his photo with the Raiders cheerleaders, which they had set up. But I asked him, I said, I didn't, who do you vote for? What influenced you? And he said, well, I listened to Joe Rogan and I really like what he had to say. But then my favorite politician is Bernie Sanders. So I went with Bernie. So I was kind of that's how wide the swath was. Crazy. I mentioned Allegiant Stadium. That I didn't look at the final numbers yet, but it was by far the most popular polling place in Las Vegas yesterday. I mean, it was the last I had looked, it was over 3,000 voters went there. There was not even, maybe one other spot had 2,000 voters. I mean, it was insane numbers. So I think that was all done, I think, through the NFL, and they opened up all the stadiums around the country for votes. So I think Allegiant may become a popular polling place in over time now.
And we just posted a story about one of the big questions that's outstanding is the U.S. Senate race here in Nevada. And I mean, one of the shocking things was the polls got that really wrong. Tell us, what are we learning about polling from the way that things are looking in that race?
Do you want to go, John?
Yeah, I thought Gabby was going to talk about this.
I was going to say, I feel like it's interesting. I don't even necessarily feel like the polls got it wrong so much as they got the base. Or let me back up. I guess so. A lot of the polls predicted, right, Rosen was going to outrun Harris, and the closer we got to the race, the smaller that margin was. So a lot of the final polls had Rosen. It'd be like Harris +1, Rosen +6, or something like that. So they thought Rosen was going to outrun Harris by 4 or 5 points. She did. Right now, she's up about 4 points, a little more on Harris's margins. But in an electorate that looks like, right now it's like Trump +5. Let's say it finishes Trump +4 or something. That margin, which I think a lot of people thought would be enough for her to, even if Harris lost Nevada, for her to win. It turns out that if Harris lost Nevada by that much, there's only so much she can outrun. So I think it's sort of like a miss on the whole by the polls. They got the sort of margin right between them in a lot of races and a lot of polls at the end, but they got the sort of starting point for Harris and Trump's support wrong.
Michelle, I think we have to Gabby knows this too. We still don't know how many mail ballots are outstanding in Clark County. We've been trying to find out. But if there are enough, and by enough, I mean 60, 70, 80,000, which is unlikely but possible, then because of what happened with those mail ballots in 22 when Catherine Cortez Masto was behind by 22,000 votes or something like that and came back and won, it's possible that Jackie Rosen could do that. But it is a threading of a needle, and there's no margin for error there in that. So once we know how many mail ballots are out there, we'll know if she has any chance at all.
And just for some context, in the 2022 election, about 6% of the total Clark County ballots were mail ballots that were received after Election Day. And it's unclear. This has been a tough election because there's not necessarily a precedent election for turnout, because 2020 was the pandemic, 2022 was not a presidential year. But if there's 6% of an estimated 1.4 million, or sorry, that would be the overall turnout, but 6% of the Clark County turnout would be in those tens of thousands ranges. It's
It'd be
just
about 60,000, I think, about
Yeah.
about percent, right?
So it's just a question of whether that holds up, whether it increases, whether it decreases.
We've got a question from Michael on YouTube. He's asked on the Senate race, do we have any idea how many mail ballots still need to be cured and how that is all going to break and what it's going to do in the Senate race?
Yeah, it's about 20,000, right, Eric, that we know of through the middle of the day yesterday. Do I have that right?
So actually that I think it's about so as of actually they updated it this morning.
Oh.
So as of 10 a.m. this morning, there were about 13,000 mail ballots that need signature cures. The 20,000 number is, or like it's 27,000. That number was ballots that need signature cures and have been cured successfully. So there is in Clark County, there's about 10,000 mail ballots, but needing cures. But again, there's not much of a partisan difference among those ballots. The registered voter who turned in those ballots, and as I'm sure we'll get to, there's the large majority of those ballots are nonpartisan voters, and not based on what we see may not necessarily be swaying to Democrats as much as they need.
That's a great segue into, this was an election of nonpartisans. That was a huge storyline. They accounted for, at last, we reported 40% of election day turnout. There are a plurality of voters in Nevada right now. What did we learn about that black box of nonpartisan voters that we just didn't know where they were going to go?
I think, I mean, right off the bat, the Democratic optimism that a lot of them would sway their way and put Harris over the edge did not come to fruition, or at least has not come to fruition yet. It's a bit tough to analyze exactly what we're looking at because we don't know what all the types of ballot or the party registration breakdown of the ballots that have been counted so far, but we can infer some things. We know that they include all the pre-election day mail ballots and in-person early turnout, and those ballots had Republicans had about, I think it was about a 4% percentage point registration advantage in turnout, and Donald Trump is currently beating Harris by about 4.5%, which means that nonpartisans may even be swaying her way. Of course, that total may also be including some in-person election day ballots from yesterday where Democrats had a significant lead in Clark County. But I think the main takeaway is they held true to their name of being nonpartisan and were pretty down the middle.
And I think also we know that people can be split ticket voters as well. And so just because someone voted for former President Donald Trump doesn't necessarily mean that they voted for Republican U.S. Senate candidate Sam Brown. So I think we'll try and find out more as that election goes on. But that's something that I'm curious about is what were the splits and did they even vote down ballot, right? I think we're seeing a lot of people who may have voted in the presidential but not have gone lower. I know that Gabby had some reporting on that as well.
Yeah, if Rosen is able to pull it out, it'll be because Brown's sort of raw total of votes was lower than Trump by about, I think right now, 60,000, whereas Rosen's compared to Harris is only about 2,000. So it seems pretty much if you voted for Harris, you voted for Rosen, whereas there's a good portion of people who just voted for Trump seemingly and left the ballot blank or put none of the above for Senate or a third party candidate because the third party share and the none of the above share were higher in the Senate race than they were in the presidential. So if Rosen wins, that's her saving grace.
And it's interesting because because Sam Brown did try and tie himself to Trump more and more as they realized that that could be really important. But I don't think that voters got that message.
Well, I think he did I think you're understating it there, Tabs. Tie himself to Trump. He dove into MAGA world really hard the last few weeks. I mean, his last interview, I think, was with Wayne Allen Root, who is a super MAGA guy. And, and he talked about getting revenge on Harry Reid and doing all kinds of stuff to appeal to the base. But he's just not the same messenger as Trump is, which we found in other places. And this kind of solves the mystery that Gabby and I have been confounded by the entire cycle. Who are these Trump Rosen voters? And it turns out that they're more none of the above or not vote voters and Trump, as opposed to that. And so, I still think it's the most likely result is that she falls just short, but she has a chance to do it if there's a lot of mail in Clark County.
And can you, John, I actually thought this was really interesting, but Sam Brown lives in northern Nevada, in Reno, and he actually cast his ballot at Reno High School. When we're looking at these breakdowns, we're actually seeing that Senator Rosen has the lead in Washoe County over Sam Brown the last time I checked. And I thought that was pretty interesting. And I was curious if you had any thoughts on that.
I think that might have changed. Did that
recently change?
Did that change, or is she still ahead?
No, I think she's still ahead in Washoe.
I know she was doing very well up there. But yeah, listen, Washoe has become much more reliable for the Democrats than you would think from what the ballots look like up there and the Republicans building their registration edge. But Washoe does not become the swing county if you don't win Clark County by enough, and if you lose I haven't been able to count up the rural votes yet, but they really turned out, and there's huge landslides, especially for Trump there, but to some extent for Brown as well. And so, as I said, the math may be there for Rosen to come back, but it is a very narrow path.
I just wanted to add in, like, so I went to the Brown, victory party, whatever you want to call it, last night. That he never showed up till about 11 o'clock because, the ballots were hung up. I asked some of the organizers. I said, why did he do his own thing here at Red Rock Resort in Summerlin rather than go to the very Republican event at the Ahern Hotel on the Strip, which is near the Strip, which is a very Republican place? And he just said, well, Sam just wanted to have his own thing, and we wanted him to have, the center of attention. He wouldn't have had center of attention over the Ahern thing. So it was kind of a weird answer, but that's why he was separate from all the party over at Ahern.
What was the mood like at that Sam Brown party, Howard?
Huh?
What was the mood like at that Sam Brown party?
Everybody was just, I mean, the biggest cheers came was when because they had Fox News on all the TVs in there, and the biggest eruption came when the Ohio Senate race was called in favor of the Republican, and which effectively gave the Republicans, I guess, right, Gabby, control of the Senate. So it was just kind of, when is it? Where are the votes? Where are the votes? What's going on? It was, I had explained to several people that didn't understand. I said, the state will not count the votes until everybody has voted. So people got in line at 7, and you're looking at 2-3 hour waits, what we're hearing in different parts of the county. So that's where they were getting really upset. Why are the votes being counted? The conspiracy theories maybe were probably starting there, but yeah, it's it was they wanted to celebrate, and they found a one thing to celebrate on was on TV. So otherwise, they just sat around and just jibber jabbered.
We have a question from Will Batista on the YouTube stream. We had a lot of surrogates in the final days. I think, Eric, you were there when Mana and Jennifer Lopez was in the North Las Vegas Craig Ranch Amphitheater, and Christina Aguilera came out, Taylor Swift, and all these folks jumped on the Kamala bandwagon here. Was that helpful at the end of the day?
Did you say helpful?
Yes.
Well, if you look at the numbers, probably not. I mean, I don't know if they had a net negative impact on the race, but they didn't they didn't seem to do the convincing that they needed to, if they were seen as people that could drive Harris over the finish line in some of these states. I mean, I think celebrities are often used by Democrats pretty often. And in 2016, it didn't necessarily work out. And 8 years later, we're seeing some of the same things.
We've got another question about, I believe this is about the Senate race from Michaela. She's asking, when should or will that Senate race be called? Is it something we can expect today or 5 days down the road?
Depends what you mean by who called by. Is it going to be called by AP or called by us? The really authoritative call. Here's what I think the answer to that question is. I think we'll know by the end of today, maybe even if we're lucky, and we haven't gotten very lucky with the Clark County totals yet, but whenever those mail ballots come out, if they don't put enough of a dent in whatever Sam Brown's lead is, I think we can probably call it, because they won't get there with signature cures. And Eric can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that the pattern has been that the biggest volume comes the day after the election, and then it really dramatically peters out through Saturday. So I think it'll be called today by us if that doesn't make much of a dent. But if it does, and remember, you essentially have until Monday to cure ballots. It might take that long. So it's hard. Again, the mystery number is the number of mail ballots that are outstanding in Clark County and what Rosen's margin will be there. And until we know that, the race can't be called.
Wanted to bring Tabs in on this conversation about the supermajority. And this is something that we at the Nevada Independent, as a very legislature-focused news organization, we're really interested in. Tabs, explain what we're seeing and tell us about the supermajority tracker that's on the front page of the site.
So if you go to the front page of our website, you'll see a supermajority tracker that shows which races we've called for Democrats and Republican in both the Assembly and the state Senate. And the reason that we're tracking those is that Democrats prior to this election held a supermajority in the Assembly, but not a supermajority in the Senate. And why that's important is that if both chambers have a supermajority, which is 2/3 control by one party, they're able to easily override governor's vetoes. And during the 2023 session, what happened is Governor Joe Lombardo had a record number of vetoes by the Democrat-controlled legislature, and 75, which was a record number for one legislative session. And so I think what we were watching is, could Democrats gain a supermajority in the state Senate because they were one seat shy of that? And could Assembly Democrats keep their supermajority in the Assembly so that they would reach that? Now, what we saw as of last night was that those majorities, the supermajority wasn't reached in the Assembly. They actually ended up losing that because Republicans gained more seats than maybe what they'd had before. But there are still some races in question, and so we're watching those very, very closely. And then in the state Senate, Democrats are 2 seats shy of a supermajority. Those seats have not been called yet, and so that's another thing that we're watching today and in the next couple of days. And both of those seats, at least in the state Senate, are located in southern Nevada. So once we get those Clark County drops or numbers, hopefully we'll have more of an idea of where those stand. But I think what's really interesting is that both of the leaders in those chambers, that's Assembly Speaker Steve Yeager and Senate Majority Leader Nicole Cannizzaro, they are in districts that we have not called yet. So there's actually a potential that maybe, depending on vote totals, depending on turnout, that maybe they lose those seats. And then we're seeing a reshuffling of who's in charge and how all of that works. And it could
Did
have
that surprise you to see, especially Steve Yeager in such a close race?
Absolutely. I think those were not races that we had demarcated as close. We knew that Senator Cannizzaro's race could be kind of tight, but given the fact that she's Senate Majority Leader, given her name recognition, and this applies to Speaker Yeager as well, given all of those things, I think that we had sort of expected to see a little bit more of a lead from those and maybe even be able to call them on election night. And so absolutely, it was a surprise.
Wanted to bring in Rocio here too. Rocio has been watching school board and education races from regents to state board to Washoe and Clark school districts. Rocio, you've been tracking especially whether candidates affiliated with the conservative Moms for Liberty group that is a frequent presence in the public comment period, advocating for book bans, opposing LGBTQ related policies. Tell us what you saw in Clark County School District.
Yeah, so far we have declared a winner in one of the school board races, District E, that's in the Summerlin area. The Moms for Liberty affiliate Lorna Bitasodi beat out former teacher Camilla Bywaters in that race. So that's the first one we're seeing. We're also watching another race with another Moms for Liberty member, District B, and we haven't called that one yet, but Lydia Dominguez, the Moms for Liberty affiliate, is also leading in that race against another former teacher, Eileen Eady. There's also a third Moms for Liberty affiliate who's running for State Board of Education District 1 race, and he did not have as great of a night as the others right now. In the preliminary results, we're seeing, or actually, no, we've already declared this race. The former educator Tricia Braxton as the winner in that race. So that's two Moms for Liberty affiliates who are winning in the school board races, or at least in the lead in school races so far. In total, there's 4 seats up for grabs in the school board races. So the other ones that we're watching are the board president, Evelyn Garcia Morales. She's not doing as well in her race, but we're still tracking that. And then we've also declared another winner in the District A race, Emily Stevens, beating out Human Rights Campaign Nevada State Director Carl Catarata. So we're watching to see if there'll be 4 new trustees or 3 new trustees coming to CCSD School Board.
Are you reading anything into that? Are you hearing any chatter on, why it was such a strong night for, especially the 2 Moms for Liberty candidates that look clearly ahead on the Clark County School Board?
Yeah, I wonder if it speaks to, the presidential races. And both of the Moms for Liberty candidates definitely were Trump supporters. Lydia Dominguez, I think I remember she was even a speaker in one of Trump's visits here to Las Vegas. So I'm wondering if that kind of played into the results that we're seeing so far. But I also noted that it's interesting to see that these candidates are having success here in Clark County, whereas in Washoe County, we saw similar candidates who were backed by the far-right activist Robert Beatles, and none of those candidates in the Washoe School Board races made it out of the primaries. So it's interesting to see that shift happening here in the Clark County School Board races.
We've got more comments rolling in on the YouTube stream here. From Tyler Koski asking, do you think it's possible that Susie Lee would lose? Gabby.
You want me to say that? Yeah, put it on Gabby.
Oh, go for it, John.
Actually, that has been much closer than I'm sure she wanted it to be, and that Democrats thought it would be. It is the swing district in Nevada, but again, all this the thread that runs through all these stories, including apparently it sounds like the school board, Rocio, is that this turnout by the Republican base has affected some of these races in ways that we didn't think it would. I think it would be surprising still if Susie Lee lost, because the Clark County ballot should help her. But if they don't, then she could lose. The margin set it up. But I would bet on her winning right now. But I wouldn't even bet all of Howard's money on it.
Yeah, she's up by like 3,000 votes right now. I'll be curious to see like what the final margin is, because I think her closest race that she had was in 2020 and she won by 4, I want to say 3 or 4. So I think this just goes to show that Nevada, obviously in the presidential and the Senate race, Republicans here in DC knew that they were huge opportunities, but they pretty much gave up on the House. And I think with the composition of the electorate being what it was, they probably should have put some money in, because, Susie Lee outspent Drew Johnson by millions. And if it ends up being her closest race, I think that shows that, these seats, which Republicans have kind of written off as being well protected by the Democratic maps, are still in play.
And that, as John said, that seat has historically been, I live in in the district, it's historically been a swing district. I mean, it's gone from a Democrat, Republican almost every time. I guess this is what her third race as the second as incumbent. So
Yeah, this will be her fourth term if she wins.
yeah, so I mean,
Yeah.
it's it's interesting she's held on to this long. And like I said, we saw he saw nothing from Drew Johnson in the campaign really, just negative ads against him. So
Yeah, I think the real story here for the Republicans is get better candidates, and you might have won those races. All three of those House races, the Democratic ones, could have been in play. I mean, you had John Lee, who's a retread and a party switcher, and promised to spend a lot of his own money and didn't, and is going to end up losing. Although I think it's going to be closer than it looks now because of some of the rural votes that have come in. But he's going to lose if they had. But Drew Johnson, as you said, Howard, didn't do anything. And if they had gotten a good candidate in there, Susie Lee might be looking for a private sector job right now. And even Dina Titus might have been closer. They had the same guy who lost to her last time running again. And this is a product of what the Democrats have done, right? As was Sam Brown, they decimated the Republican bench over the years, so they didn't have much to choose from. But if they were to start developing a bench, and remember, 2026 is a midterm. It's when they have a much better chance at winning those seats. If they can recruit good candidates, and you can be sure that they're looking at that, they will have a chance at all of those seats, I think.
Yeah, and when they're looking at the map for 26 and they're thinking, okay, where did we, what was the margins in races, especially that we didn't invest in? Because where would money have made a difference? And I imagine they're going to circle CD3 for sure.
We've got some questions coming in on the ballot measures. Let's start with the big Q3 one. Tabs, if you want to tell us what's your observation of how that flipped from 2022 to 2024, from voters supporting that concept to really a pretty resounding defeat this time.
It passed narrowly in 2022. And just for people watching, question 3 is the ranked choice open primaries. It had to go through twice if it wanted to end up in the Nevada state constitution. It passed in 2022 by a very, very slim margin. And interestingly enough, it passed without any opposition spending from Democrats and Republicans. Democrats and Republicans and other groups spoke out against it, but they didn't really put any money into the race. This election cycle, we actually saw money in this race from both support and opposition. Support spent, I think, more than $12 million looking at their campaign finance reports. But we saw opposition spend about $2 million. And I think opposition really focused on the nature of ranked choice voting is confusing. It's hard for voters. I know that when they were door knocking, that they were talking, Democrats especially were talking to voters about it. And we saw both parties joining forces on this. It was not just, Democrats are against it or Republicans are for it. No, Democrats and Republicans were united on this issue because it sort of, I think it would have broken some of the party apparatus's abilities to, predict elections, recruit candidates, have expected results. And so I think that both of the parties combined, the additional spending, the sort of focus on ranked choice voting as opposed to the open primary nature of this really made it a different story this year.
It was also interesting in your story that went out this morning. Ranked choice voting measures went down in a lot of states where they were up. I mean, do we think the concept is not popular, or it was just poorly executed?
If I had to take a stab at it, I think that what we've seen is that a lot of these were run by national groups. They weren't actually supported by local level organizations. And there were grassroots movements who were doing this, but they didn't have the funding that these national groups did or the connections. And so I think there was a mismatch in, sort of what the national level were doing versus what the locals were doing. And then I also think that a lot of these national, at least here in Nevada, they focused on open primaries. They didn't focus on the ranked choice aspect of this. So they were highly criticized for that. And I think voters voters were worried that they wouldn't understand ranked choice voting when they were casting a ballot. Now, if you had a conversation with one of those grassroots volunteers, or you like understood the ranked choice, maybe that wasn't part of your calculus when you were voting for the measure. But I think broadly speaking, that probably had an effect as well. And the only other thing I think is important is nationally, I think we've seen a discussion about the security of elections. I know that Democrats and Republicans alike are worried about that. And it could be that in this pivotal election year, where conversations about the safety and security of the election system were in play, that maybe there were fears. And again, I don't have backup for this, but maybe there were fears influencing people to vote against it because they were worried about such an extreme change to the election system.
Another question on the stream is about that voter ID ballot measure. I think, Eric, you wrote about kind of the history of it. I mean, it's been around since 2015 at least. They held back for all these years, and then we see a landslide in this election. What are you taking away from what we saw last night on question 7?
I think the main takeaway is that it's finally what elected official Republicans had wanted in the state for years. And of course, it's not going into effect yet because it's a constitutional amendment. It must also pass the voters in 2026. But polling showed wide bipartisan support for this. The results seem to align with that. And it's definitely a big win for Republican Governor Joe Lombardo, who had tried to pursue voter ID legislation in the last legislative session, but it got nowhere in the Democratic-controlled legislature. And it was also interesting that there was never much of a campaign against the measure, at least if you're looking at it purely through dollars spent. I think people on both sides expected this to pass, given that the polling showed wide support for it from both parties, from voters of both parties.
Another question we have from the YouTube stream is where Nevada overall turnout is looking relative to 2020. Are we looking at any sort of records? And did you notice any special trends this year in the way people are voting?
Well, I think it's a little bit apples and oranges just because of so many nonpartisans have registered since 2020. So the turnout could be lower because a lot of those are what I call zombie voters, people who were auto-registered and aren't ever going to vote. But we still don't know what the final turnout number is. I thought it might get to 1.4 million, but even that is not a huge turnout. I think it was about 1.4 in 2020. Someone can correct me on that, but I'm pretty sure that's about what it was. And so it's not going to be much bigger than that, and it may be lower than that. And the percentage will also be lower than because of the difference in voters. So I think there were 1.8 million in 2020, and there's more than 2 million now. So I don't think that the percentage is going to be very high. There a lot of nonpartisans turned out. They're a huge share of the electorate this time, and that's why the Democrats, and frankly why I thought that they would do better at the top of the ticket, because as Eric pointed out, they don't appear to have gone for the Democrats as much as they thought they would, if at all. I mean, as I still find the most astounding result that Trump, essentially was very competitive in Clark County, and that has just not happened. Now that the distance may grow a little bit with these mail ballots, but still, he's going to end up. I mean, Biden won Clark County by 9 points, and Harris will be lucky to win it by 3 or 4, and so. That's a huge difference, and that's a real big warning sign for the Democrats for 26, I think.
Yeah, we're at about 1.3 million right now in turnout. But like John's saying, by percent, it'll probably end up, I imagine, being lower than 2020, just because there's so many new voters that John's been referring to as zombie voters who were automatically registered and might not be very politically engaged. But it all depends on how much mail is left to see what that final number is.
One interesting trend, though, because you mentioned interesting trends, is that in Washoe County, at least, and haven't looked across the state, we saw what the Washoe County Deputy Registrar of Voters described as a pretty large number of provisional ballots that were that were filed. And those provisional ballots typically are same day voter registrations. Some of them I think came from young voters at UNR. Some of those may have also come about as a result of the new election system that is being implemented, where voters are having, maybe it was hard to look them up, so it was easier just to same day register them. And those still need to be, identities still need to be verified, and to make sure that somebody didn't vote in two counties or other issues that could crop up. And there were about 6,000 in Washoe County counting early vote and election day.
Yeah, and a lot of people were taking advantage of that same day registration. That was part of the reason why we were one of the only states that was not giving any results as of almost 10 p.m. So to bring Howard into this a little bit, Howard, you were keeping an eye on Southern Nevada local government. What storylines stood out to you from those races that you're watching?
Right now, just the two results. The mayor of Las Vegas, Shelley Berkeley, won pretty handedly last night, and she'll actually her first vote will be on the Badlands issue. That's been a thorn in the side of the city for about 9 years now. So they may have a settlement in December on that. The county commission was interesting, Clark County Commission, because for the first time in 20 years, they've elected a Republican. April Becker will take over on District C. After the incumbent Ross Miller didn't run for re-election. He pretty much wasn't there anyway for 4 years. But April will take over, and then actually there's another race. Michael Naft, who has seemed pretty safe in District A. He's only like 600 votes ahead as of the last count we've seen against a Republican whose name now is still escaping me. So that's huh?
Ryan Hamilton, who used to work in the state and then came back, very conservative guy, worked for someone named Robert Einthoven, who was Adam Laxalt's guy. And so, and Hamilton didn't spend any money that I know of.
I mean, Michael Knapp was everywhere and everything, and he wanted to be included in everything. So we'll see as as these new votes, as all the late votes come in, and we'll see if that changes that race, or how that moves forward. But it could be surprising. All of a sudden, the Clark County Commission, which has been solidly Democrat for 20 years, could have two of the 7 members could be Republican after come January. So we'll see.
John, you wrote in your newsletter this morning that it's inconceivable that Trump came that close in Clark County, and you wrote the core of the party didn't just underperform, they turned their backs. I mean, what do you think is going on, in the Democratic Party that we're getting these kinds of results?
Well, I kind of alluded to this earlier. I mean, and someone we were talking about, for instance, Beyonce and Taylor Swift and all these celebrities, J-Lo. I think there's a sense from some Democrats and even some of the core of the base that the Democratic Party has become too elitist, and that just played into it more than it helped them, and that the far left agenda on immigration, this is how they perceive it, on immigration, causing inflation to get out of control. I think that they just said, there's got to be something better than this. And so I don't think they paid attention to what Trump was saying or what his policies may or may not be. And even though there's no data on this, I have always thought that the no taxes on tips thing, while it may be completely unworkable and it'll never happen, was a good way to appeal to the working class in Nevada, a state with a higher proportion of non-college educated voters, and that could happen. So I think that is the main reason. But if I may, Michelle, I just got a text, and I want to break some news here for us, and Gabby will be especially interested in this. We now have the number on the drop boxes from yesterday. 55,000 drop box mail ballots in Clark. Those are not going to be tallied, from what I understand, until tonight. Aren't we lucky? Gabby, it'll probably be 2 a.m. your time if you're lucky. And there's another 9,000 ballots that they're going to release at 1 p.m. which is coming up pretty soon, supposedly. So I think that's right on the edge of what Rosen would need, depending on what the margins are. And I still think she's not going to quite make it, but that's the news. 55,000 in the drop boxes.
That's in Clark.
That's in Clark. Yep.
There's still a little bit in Washoe, I think, too, to come, right?
Yeah, and we're waiting on Washoe to tell us what that number is. I have a request out with them.
Yeah,
So.
that's interesting though.
We'll take one more question from a YouTube viewer before we kind of wrap up. But Katie is asking if we think that California transplants have affected this year's election results. Has anybody seen evidence of that?
I mean, we see a huge transient population in Nevada as it is. There's been movement from California to Nevada. I think that definitely shapes the electorate. I know that people talking to voters as part of reporting other things anecdotally, we've heard that people left California because it was too blue, or you go down to Douglas County and you'll see a lot of California transplants down there, especially retirees who are looking to move to a state without an income tax so they can get out their income tax, their 401ks, retirements, all of that. So I definitely think that California transplants have shaped it. I don't think there's a way right now that we can identify exactly what the role of those former Californians play in our election system or how it sways. And I don't think it's necessarily that they're blue or they're red. I think it's probably a mix. And we also see that people move around in the state a lot, and we don't just have people moving here from California. There's other states as well. Reno and Las Vegas are places that I think are exciting for people to move to. And we've seen that the housing market shows that too, with sort of the tightening of it.
Yeah, this is something that Steve Daines, who's the chair of the National Republican Senatorial Committee, and he's a senator from Montana, he talks about a lot. He calls them cows, people from California, Oregon, and Washington. And he says that they're refugees, not missionaries. So, they're leaving California, fleeing California, as he would say. I would imagine a lot of the reason people move is because of prices, right? And housing, I think that's a huge one. And I think it's sort of twofold. There's a bunch of people who've come in from California, right, to Nevada because housing in particular has gotten really expensive. And in turn, that creates more demand in Nevada, which makes housing more expensive. So I think one of the themes of like Californians coming to Nevada and, growth in Nevada, and one of the political terrains for the next decade in Nevada, I think, will be the issue of housing. And that's something where the migration from California really matters.
And we saw housing.
Quick little anecdote. The Joe Rogan, Bernie Sanders guy moved here from California earlier this year and re-registered in Nevada, in Las Vegas. So
and we even saw the role of housing in the election. I mean, we Harris talked about housing when she came to speak here. Trump did as well. I mean, that played out. That was a huge focus of both campaigns in the Silver State.
We're running out of time, but I wanted to kind of go around the group and if anyone has a result that surprised them last night that we haven't gone over yet. I guess we can start with John.
I guess I am a little, I'm surprised by a lot of things, obviously, since you pointed out at the beginning how wrong I was on my predictions. But I guess what surprises me the most is that you have the three main leaders of the Nevada legislature, Nicole Cannizzaro, the majority leader of the state Senate, the majority leader of the assembly, and the speaker of the assembly, all in nip and tuck races that most people weren't paying much attention to, and whose Republican opponents spent almost no money. Probably the only person on this Zoom and the only person in Nevada who could tell you the name of Steve Yeager's opponent is Tabbs, and maybe she doesn't even know the name of that opponent. So the result in the legislature, the guy who was going to be seen as the big victor in this election is Joe Lombardo, because he is, and the Democrats are going to, I guess you can see it both ways, but they're either going to have to work with him or they're not going to get anything done again. And as Tabbs pointed out, you're going to see 75 vetoes again. So it'll be really interesting. And I almost envy, and I'm going to emphasize the word almost envy, our group of legislative correspondents this time, because this is going to be a fascinating session to cover, one of the most fascinating in a long time.
Eric, any surprises for you?
I think our perception of the presidential race isn't a surprise in light of what happened earlier in the night, with all the other swing states also moving in Trump's direction. But I think it's worth noting that the results, and they'll probably narrow a little bit as more mail ballots come in, but they seem to more align with Trump's dominance in Nevada when Joe Biden was still on the ticket, at least according to the polls, rather than the much more narrow margin that was expected with Harris on the ticket. And it's obviously going to spur a lot of discussions about whether Harris was ever in a winnable position. Obviously, I'm sure people have seen those graphics that showed nearly every county moving to the right compared to 2020. And that seems to be the case in Nevada as well. And it also seems to be originating from just a unhappiness with the status quo. And the economy is obviously top of mind in Nevada. So the margin of the presidential race surprised me. If you were just going to tell me a day before that she would be where she is. And I think it's gonna, the question from here, not just in Nevada, is just where the Democratic Party goes from here.
Tab, surprises for you?
Yeah. So first of all, John, Assemblyman Steve Yeager is facing Erica Neely in his district. So that's his opponent. Just thought we should add that. Since John stole one of mine, I was actually going to say that Washoe County, like the ticket splitters are fascinating to me, right? We saw that Washoe County breaking for Trump. Then you have Rosen, and then down ballot. What's interesting is Washoe County Commissioner Alexis Hill is projected, I believe she's projected to win or is winning her race right now. And she's a Democrat in the district, defeating an opponent she defeated in 2020. And then further down the ballot, there's Washoe County ballot question 1, which is a library funding question. And that one is actually losing or behind right now. Now, I don't know if we can call anything yet because of mail ballots, those coming in. But I just thought that was so interesting. And Alexis Hill campaigned really hard in the last stretch of the election, really pushing people to vote for that library measure, especially because it's already been in existence. It's already been kind of working and in an application. The timeline ran out on it. They're just looking to renew it. And I think that people maybe misunderstood that ballot question, or maybe there's we've seen some of those culture wars, to use the term, against libraries. So that's something that I was really fascinated by just out of the results last night. It was that national to sort of regional to local sort of trend. And again, also we're seeing Republican Congressman Mark Amodei winning in Northern Nevada as well. So definitely something I'm watching.
Howard, any surprises for you?
Other than what I mentioned, but of course, having been married now for almost 40 years to a now retired judge and have a daughter that's in law, I look at the judicial races, and some of these people that got elected, there's several current judges that are losing because people don't know who you have to go to a lawyer. You go to our we do that a judicial survey that came out this in the middle of the election. We do that, but people don't know. And we have all these judges on these races, and unless you get to go find a lawyer. I still get calls from a lot of friends who say, who do I vote for? And we give them who we're voting for judge. It's still, to this day, I still don't understand why we're still electing judges, but that's just it's never going to change. I think, I've been watching this for so many decades, like John has. We're both old, we know, and it just is never going to change.
Mm-hmm. Rocio, anything surprise you?
I don't know if it's surprising, but the race that I'm most anxious to see what happens with is Washoe County School Board District G race. It's very tight between the incumbent Diane Nicolette and the tech businessman and California transplant Perry Rosenstein. They're like separated by, I think, 1,000-ish votes. And that race, I think, like I mentioned, after the Robert Beadle's candidates dropped off, it became a little less exciting. But I do know that the teachers union invested a lot of money into Rosenstein. That was the candidate that they're backing. So I'm waiting to see if that money will pay off or if the incumbent will stay on the board.
I do think, Michelle, based on what Rocio said about the Clark County School Board, that all these teachers in the Clark County School District should teach Tom Sawyer before the new members come on board, because they may not be able to teach it after that.
Gabby, did anything surprise you?
Yeah, I guess I feel like all cycle long I've been trying to figure out, in addition to who the Trump Rosen voters are, what's sort of the maximum amount that Rosen could outrun Harris. Like what's the biggest margin that she could do. And people I talked to, I felt like, 4 or 5 points was probably towards the max end. It looks like she's going to do it by 4. And she might very well still lose. And I think that's surprising to me that she sort of hit what I thought was that max of outrunning Harris, and that still might not be enough.
Well, we've hit the hour, so we're going to have to wrap things up here, but we appreciate all of our viewers who debriefed with us today about another fascinating election that we've just witnessed. Keep following us on the NevadaIndependent.com. We'll be breaking this all down more in the coming days with additional stories. We'll be calling that elusive Senate race when we're ready. Yeah, just follow us for all sorts of updates in the coming days. Thank you.